The whole town begged her not to go back, and now she finally understands why. A poor single mom, desperate for shelter in the dead of a Minnesota winter, inherited a frozen lakeside cabin she never knew existed. She thought it was just old wood and forgotten memories until her 3 children heard something knocking beneath the cabin floorboards. What they uncovered wasn't just a hidden room, but a secret sealed under ice for generations. A secret powerful enough to rewrite the future of the entire town and change their lives forever. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city, state, or country in the comments below. It's always incredible to see how far these journeys travel. Snow drifted sideways across the frozen streets, the wind gnawing at every window it found. Duluth in midwinter was never gentle, but that morning it felt especially merciless, as if the whole city were made of ice and sharp corners. Inside a cramped, aging studio apartment, 2 blocks from a shuttered gas station, Emily Carter wrapped her thin coat tighter around her body while her breath fogged in the stale air. Emily was 34 but looked older in moments like this, exhaustion settling into the faint lines around her hazel eyes. Her dark brown hair, once thick and wild, was now hastily pulled into a frayed ponytail, a few strands brushing her cheek as she bent to tuck a blanket around her youngest child. Her skin had the pale, stretched look of someone always caught between hunger and responsibility. She had a softness to her features, but life had pressed something steely into her expression, determination made from debt, fear, and love. Her 3 children were scattered around the tiny room, trying to distract themselves from the cold that crept through the thin walls. Noah, 10 years old, sat cross-legged on the floor near the heater vent, even though the heat blowing out was barely warmer than his breath. He was slender, with shaggy blonde hair that fell into his blue-gray eyes always scanning, always noticing. He had learned too early to measure the world by danger, by distance, by whether his mother looked more tired than yesterday. Beneath his quietness, however, lived an alert, protective streak that made him seem older than 10. Grace, 7, sat on the edge of the bed, humming softly to her own hands, which she cupped together as though she were warming an invisible bird. She was small for her age, with soft brown curls and gentle eyes the color of honey. Grace had a tenderness that felt almost fragile, but Emily knew better. The little girl carried a rare resilience, a way of finding beauty in the ugliest corners. She had once drawn a sunrise on a torn receipt while sitting in a shelter hallway, telling her mother, "It looks like this if you pretend." That was who Grace was, a child who could pretend the world into gentler shapes. And then there was Eli, 4 years old, with round cheeks, dark lashes, and the stubborn grip of a child who refused to let go of the one thing that kept him safe, his mother's sleeve. He clutched it now as if the world outside, the blanket fort he had built, might swallow him whole. Eli rarely spoke in full sentences. His words came out soft, half-whispered, as though he believed everything he said needed permission to exist. He had been born during a winter storm, and Emily often thought the cold had somehow stayed inside him, making him always seek warmth, always seeking her. The apartment felt smaller every day, suffocating with its peeling paint, its second-hand furniture, and the faint smell of mildew that clung to everything. Emily glanced at the unpaid heating bill tucked beneath a chipped mug on the counter. She didn't need to look at it to know the numbers. She had memorized them the way other people memorized birthdays. She worked whatever job she could, cleaning offices at night, stocking shelves before dawn, taking temporary shifts wherever someone would pay minimum wage in cash. But Duluth winters were long, and the people who hired for odd jobs hired fewer during storms. It had been 3 days since her last shift. Every hour she spent awake felt like a new battle between hope and panic. When a knock sounded at the door, sharp against the wind's moaning, Emily stiffened. Her heart hammered too fast. Knocks rarely meant kindness in her life. Eviction notices, inspections, neighbors complaining about noise, anything was possible. She tiptoed across the room, Eli clinging to her hip like a shadow, and opened the door a crack. A familiar woman stood there, Mrs. Harrow, the building manager, wrapped in a thick green parka that made her look like a tired Christmas tree. Her face was round ruddy from the cold, with deep lines etched around her mouth from years of arguing with tenants and utility companies. She wasn't cruel, but she wasn't patient either. Her dark brows were always pulled down as if the entire world disappointed her in small, exhausting ways. "Morning," she muttered, her breath smoky in the cold hallway. "Mail for you. Came to the office by mistake." Emily accepted the envelope carefully, as if it were fragile. She murmured a thank you, but Mrs. Harrow was already walking away, boots thudding heavily on the worn carpet. Emily shut the door and stared at the envelope. Thick paper. Official lettering. Not the kind of envelope poor people usually received. Her stomach twisted with dread. She sat down on the edge of the bed, the springs groaning beneath her. Mom Noah asked, watching her. Grace leaned in beside her. Eli buried his face into her side. Emily tore the envelope open. Inside was a letter printed in neat professional font. To Miss Emily Carter. "We regret to inform you of the passing of Miss Margaret Hale. You are listed as the sole legal heir of her lakeside cabin property." She blinked. Margaret Hale. The name was a ghost, someone Emily had heard only once, buried in one of her own mother's drunken arguments 2 decades earlier. A distant relative, someone who had once helped the family long ago. Someone who had disappeared from their lives long before Emily ever had children. The property is located near the northern woods along Lake Superior. Please contact our office to arrange transfer of keys and documents. Emily lowered the letter slowly, her breath catching in her throat. A cabin. A real structure. A place. Her mind flooded instantly with fear and disbelief. Why her? Why now? What was she supposed to do with a frozen cabin in the middle of a Minnesota winter? Was this a blessing or a trap disguised as one? Noah leaned closer. "Is it bad?" he whispered. Emily didn't answer at first. She felt something unfamiliar blooming inside her chest, something she couldn't name, an ache mixed with hope so sharp it hurt. A home. Not a rental, not a shelter, not a borrowed futon or a freezing room that smelled like someone else's cooking. A home. Finally, she looked at her children and forced her voice steady. I think it might be good," she said softly. Then, almost to herself, which is somehow even scarier. Grace's eyes widened. "Do we get to see it?" Emily's throat tightened. She imagined the cabin surrounded by ice snow blanketing the roof, wind carving through the trees. She imagined the possibility of warmth of a fireplace, of something hers. "Yes," she whispered. "I think we will." But beneath that whisper lay a deeper truth, one she didn't dare say aloud. She was terrified of hope because hope had a habit of betraying her. But for her children, she would follow it anyway, even if it led her into the heart of a frozen wilderness. And so, with the winter wind howling against the window and the envelope trembling in her hands, Emily Carter allowed herself for the first time in months to imagine a future that wasn't shaped by fear. The bus groaned like an exhausted animal as it climbed the last steep road leading out of Duluth, its headlights cutting narrow lines through the growing curtain of snow. Emily sat near the back, her children gathered close, the 4 of them bundled in mismatched scarves and jackets that had survived more winters than they were meant to. Inside the bus, the air was heavy with damp wool and old heater fumes, but outside everything was swallowed by white. The kind of white that could erase roads, memories, or entire lives if one stayed still for too long. Emily rested her forehead lightly against the icy window, watching the world blur past rows of pine trees stiff with frost. Telephone poles crusted in snow, abandoned barns standing like skeletons of forgotten stories. Across from her, Noah pressed his palms against the glass, his breath fogging a small circle he kept wiping away. His eyes were wide, restless with curiosity, and nerves darting around as though trying to memorize the entire journey. He had always been a child who cataloged the world the way other kids collected toys. Grace sat beside him, holding a faded backpack on her lap as if it were something alive. She stared at the swirling snow beyond the window, her warm brown eyes reflecting the dim lights inside the bus. Eli sat on Emily's lap, sucking quietly on 2 fingers, his head buried under her chin, his small body trembling whenever the bus shook. The boy feared loud noises, sudden movements any place that was not familiar. Emily rubbed his back in slow circles, trying to quiet not just him, but the storm in her own chest. At the front of the bus, the driver cleared his throat loudly before announcing they were 30 minutes from Emerson Woods, the closest stop to the cabin noted in the lawyer's letter. The driver, Harold Montgomery, was a tall, thick-built man in his late 50s with a noticeably weathered face. His beard was gray and unruly, curling from beneath his chin like frostbitten moss. His deep-set eyes were a dull blue, serious but not unfriendly, carrying a heaviness that suggested he had once known loss intimately. Though rough in appearance, he had spoken gently to the children earlier, joking with Noah about the cold and telling Grace that the snowflakes looked like dancing stars tonight. Harold carried himself with the unhurried steadiness of a man who had lived through enough Minnesota winters to know fear was useless, if not accompanied by preparation. As the bus rattled on, Emily replayed the letter's words in her mind. Lakeside cabin, Soul Air keys to be collected property transfer. She had made the call that morning to confirm its legitimacy. Her voice shaking as she spoke to a receptionist whose name she barely remembered. It still didn't feel real. How did someone inherit a cabin from a relative they had never met? Why had this woman, Margaret Hale, chosen her of all people? As the single successor, Emily's mother had never spoken kindly of their extended relations. In fact, she had spoken so little that Emily never understood how many branches their family tree actually had. Something about that silence now felt strange, like a door intentionally kept shut. The bus turned sharply, making Eli flinch. Emily tightened her arms around him, whispering soothing words, her voice barely audible over the engine. Noah glanced over, worry flickering across his face. He was protective to a fault, a trait she often feared came from having to grow up too quickly. Grace leaned her head on Emily's shoulder, her curls brushing lightly against her cheek. For a moment, Emily closed her eyes, feeling the fragile weight of her daughter's trust, her son's vigilance, her youngest child's trembling. A cabin was only a structure, but maybe, just maybe, it could become sanctuary. When the bus finally stopped, the cold slammed into them the moment the doors hissed open. Wind whipped through the trees lining the road, bending branches like brittle arms. The sign near the bus stop read Emerson Woods Trailhead, though the letters were nearly buried under snow. Harold climbed down first his boots, crunching loudly, and gestured for them to gather their bags. "The cabin you're looking for, it's about 1.5 miles down that road," he said, pointing toward a narrow path where frost coated the air itself. "You sure you know where you're going?" he asked, not unkindly, but with the concern of someone who understood exactly how dangerous this wilderness could be. Emily lifted her chin steady, though her voice wavered. "Yes, thank you." Harold studied her for a moment, perhaps measuring the thinness of her coat, the exhaustion beneath her eyes, but said nothing more. He offered Noah a small nod, gentle but firm, before climbing back into the bus. The doors closed, the bus pulled away, and the 4 of them were left alone with the wind. They walked. Snow crunched beneath their worn shoes. The forest on both sides felt ancient and watchful, the trees towering like silent witnesses. Noah marched ahead with determined steps, Grace in the middle, whispering little encouragements to herself and Eli, clutching Emily's hand so tightly it hurt. They passed an old rusted mailbox half buried in snow, the name Hale barely visible in flaking black letters. Emily felt something twist in her chest at the sight, an unexpected ache of connection to a woman she never knew. The path widened suddenly, revealing a clearing, and there it stood. The cabin looked like it had slept through decades of snowstorms. The walls were gray, the wood warped but sturdy. The roof sagged under a thick sheet of ice that glimmered faintly in the fading light. The windows were opaque with frost, No smoke rose from the chimney. It was the sort of place a ghost might call home. Yet as Emily stepped closer, she felt a strange pull, a stillness that didn't feel abandoned but expectant. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the old iron key. It was surprisingly heavy, cold enough to burn her fingers. The children gathered around her. She inserted the key. It resisted at first, stiff from disuse, and then suddenly the lock gave way with a click that echoed like a quiet exhale. Emily pushed the door open. Warmth washed over them. Not heat from a running furnace, not the artificial air of radiators. This was different. A lingering warmth, as if the cabin had been holding its breath waiting for them. Noah stepped inside, first curiosity overcoming caution. Grace followed, letting out a small gasp. Eli hesitated until Emily nudged him gently forward. Inside, the air smelled faintly of pine dust and something sweet she couldn't immediately place. The floorboards groaned, but didn't feel weak. A fireplace sat in the corner, ashes cold yet strangely fresh. The furniture, though old, showed signs of recent use, as if someone had sat in the rocking chair only weeks ago. Emily's pulse quickened. She rubbed her arms, feeling the hairs rise along her skin. It was irrational, she told herself. Cabin wood held heat longer. Maybe someone from the town checked on the property occasionally. Maybe. But deep in her chest, an instinct stirred something was not entirely ordinary here. The children darted around, exploring every corner. Noah opened cabinets, inspecting them like a young detective. Grace spun in a slow circle, marveling at every detail. Eli pressed his small hand against the warm wooden wall, whispering, "It's not cold." And for the first time in months, Emily saw a spark of joy in their faces, a tiny light fighting through the darkness of their exhaustion. Still, she couldn't shake the unease. The warmth, the lingering scent, the feeling that the cabin already knew them. She stepped back toward the open doorway, staring at the key in her hand, and wondered, not for the first time, what exactly she had inherited. A home, a chance, or something deeper still, something that might reveal itself piece by piece, whether she was ready or not. Whatever it was, she whispered into the dim cabin light they were already inside. Night settled over the cabin the way snow settled over the pines, quietly at first, then all at once, pressing down with a heaviness that felt almost ancient. Outside, the blizzard thickened, flinging handfuls of icy wind against the windows until the glass shuddered with each gust. Emily lit the oil lamp she'd found on a shelf, its wick sputtering alive with a trembling amber glow that painted the room in warm, uneven light. Shadows stretched across the floor like long fingers reaching for the past. She moved slowly, absorbing every detail of the cabin as though trying to memorize it before it vanished. In the far corner, a bookshelf bowed under the weight of old leather-bound journals and dusty encyclopedias. The spines were cracked, the gold lettering faded. The air carried a mix of pine resin, old paper, and something faintly sweet, like dried herbs. She ran her fingers along the shelves, pausing at a rolled map tied with a thin strip of brittle cloth. Unfurling it revealed a hand-drawn illustration of the entire lakeside area, dated 1943, each curve of the shoreline inked with careful precision. Someone had loved this land enough to draw it slowly, deliberately, as if afraid to forget even one rock or tree. On the table lay a stack of letters wrapped in twine, brittle edges yellowed from time. She loosened the knot and opened the first envelope. Its handwriting, small and rigid, belonging to someone meticulous, someone who measured their thoughts before committing them to ink. The letter spoke of winters harsher than this one, of repairs made by hand, of long nights waiting for spring. And then she found the photograph. The moment she lifted it, her breath stalled. The picture showed a man standing before the frozen expanse of Lake Superior, a tall, broad-shouldered figure with a stern set to his jaw. His hair, dark and thick, was pushed back by the wind, and his eyes, deep-set and sharp, held a kind of quiet resolve that pierced through the faded paper. He looked to be in his 40s, with rugged features that suggested a life spent outdoors, perhaps someone who had worked with his hands, fought storms head-on, and never backed down from the cold. On the back of the photo, in faint pencil strokes, read the words, "For the one who comes after me." Emily traced the sentence with her thumb, feeling a strange tremor of recognition, despite never having seen this man before. There was something about his stance, a mix of defiance and longing, that tugged at her. She wondered whether he had been lonely here or fiercely attached to solitude, whether he had anticipated passing something down, whether he had known she would be the one to inherit his silence. For a moment, she felt watched, not in a threatening way, but in the way someone watches over something precious. In the other room, Noah's voice suddenly broke through the creaking walls. "Mom?" he called, tense. Emily's heart jolted. She rushed toward the small living area where her children huddled near the floorboards. Noah was crouched low, his ear pressed to the wood. Grace hovered beside him, her curls falling into her face, her eyes wide, not with fear, but with fascination. Eli clung to her leg, his small hand fisted in her pant leg, his round face pale and uncertain. "There's something under the floor," Noah whispered. "It's moving." Emily knelt beside him, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Moving?" how she asked, softly. He shook his head, listening again. "Not like an animal," he murmured. "It sounds like tapping. Slow. Like someone knocking from underneath." Grace nodded vigorously. "I heard it too. It was like one knock, then another. Like it was waiting for us to answer." Eli whimpered, burying his face against Emily's arm. A chill slithered up Emily's spine, though the room was warm. The wind raged outside, but this noise, this tapping, felt deliberate, intentional, and wrong in a way she couldn't define. She took a slow breath, reminding herself that old houses made noises. Wood expanded and contracted. Winter storms played tricks on the ears. "It's probably just the wind shifting the foundation," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Or ice cracking under the house." Noah looked unconvinced. Grace's eyes sparkled with both wonder and fear. Eli clung tighter. Emily stood and guided them toward the old sofa by the fireplace. She decided to distract them by focusing on settling in for the night. She rummaged through a cabinet until she found a stack of wool blankets, coarse but warm, and draped them across her children. The cabin felt strange but also safe in a way she had never expected. It felt lived in, tended to, cared for. She sensed a presence in the way the warmth lingered on the walls, and the faint smell of burning pine, and the fact that every object seemed to have been placed thoughtfully, purposefully. And yet this tapping under the floor unsettled her stirring old protective instincts. As she tried to sweep away her unease, a soft knock came at the door. Not from the floor. The door. Emily froze. Noah sat up straight. Grace stopped breathing. Eli's eyes went round as marbles. Another knock. Slow. Deliberate. She approached cautiously, holding the lantern high, casting long shadows across the wooden walls. When she opened the door, only a crack, she found a man standing on the porch. He was tall, at least 6'2", with a sturdy build, wrapped in a thick brown winter coat lined with fur along the hood. Snow dusted his shoulders, and the knit cap pulled low over his sandy blonde hair. His jaw was square and darkened by a few days' worth of stubble, and his eyes, clear and pale green, held a kind caution. He removed his gloves, revealing rough hands with calloused knuckles, the hands of someone used to physical labor. He seemed to be around his late 30s or early 40s. "Evening," he said gently, his voice deep but softened by a faint local accent. "Didn't mean to startle you." Emily's grip tightened on the lantern. "Can I help you?" she asked, wary. The man nodded. "Name's Wesley Grant. I live down the road a ways, about a 20-minute walk when the weather's decent." He gestured toward the swirling snow. "Not that tonight counts." His tone carried quiet humor. Emily studied him, searching for signs of threat. But something about him, his posture, The hesitation in his voice suggested he had learned to tread lightly around strangers, maybe due to past conflict or loss. "I saw smoke earlier," Wesley continued. "Wanted to make sure someone wasn't breaking in or trying to shelter here without permission. This cabin's been empty a long time." Emily motioned slightly to her children. "It belongs to me now," she explained, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "Inherited it." Wesley's brows lifted, slightly surprised but not suspicion. "Margaret Hale's place?" he asked. Emily nodded. "You knew her?" Wesley looked down for a moment, snowflakes catching in his stubble. "Everyone around here knew her," he said quietly. "She was particular, independent. Kept to herself most days, but wasn't unkind. Just had her ways." Emily felt a tug of gratitude, or maybe relief. "I see." Wesley cleared his throat softly. "Look, storm's rough tonight. If you need anything, I'm not far." He hesitated before adding, "And if you hear strange noises, old cabins make all sorts of sounds, especially in weather like this." Emily stiffened. "The tapping. Have you heard anything unusual from this cabin before?" she asked. Wesley's gaze flicked to the side, then back to her. "Sometimes," he said slowly. "But nothing dangerous." Something in his tone suggested he wasn't telling her everything. But before she could press him, he stepped back. "Try to stay warm. Night." He disappeared into the storm, his silhouette swallowed by white. Emily closed the door, her pulse heavy in her ears. Noah watched her closely. Grace whispered, "Do you think he heard the knocking too?" Emily forced a smile, brushing a curl behind her daughter's ear. "It's an old cabin," she repeated, though the words felt thinner every time she said them. Still, she tucked her children into the blankets again, smoothing their hair, holding on to this fragile new shelter as tightly as she could. But deep beneath the floorboards, as the wind howled and the shadows swayed, something tapped once, then twice so softly it might have been memory itself. Morning arrived, slowly dragging a pale gray light across the snow-laden clearing, as if the sun itself hesitated to touch the frozen cabin. The storm had eased, but flakes still drifted lazily from the sky, swirling in soft spirals that made the world seem quieter than it was. Inside the cabin, the air carried the faint warmth left from the fire Emily had tended through most of the night. She had barely slept, her mind replaying the knock at the door, Wesley's cautious expression, and the tapping beneath the floorboards that seemed to echo with intention. She forced herself up, rubbing the exhaustion from her eyes. Noah was already awake, sitting cross-legged by the fireplace, flashlight in hand, as if he'd been waiting for her to rise. Grace leaned sleepily against a pillow curls tangled, while Eli curled into a tight ball beneath one of the heavy blankets. Noah's gaze snapped toward Emily the moment she stirred. "Mom," he said, his voice firm with certainty. "We need to check under the floor. Today." Emily hesitated. She didn't want to feed any fear or curiosity. She especially didn't want to uncover something dangerous. But she saw it in Noah's eyes, the sharp, calculating alertness that had guided him through shelters and streets, counting risks and exits without ever being taught. If something was beneath the floorboards, ignoring it wouldn't make it go away. "Okay," she said with caution. "But we do it safely. Together." After breakfast, canned peaches and stale crackers, the children gathered in the living room where the tapping had sounded the night before. Emily supervised as Noah walked slowly across the wooden planks, feeling for inconsistencies. His thin eyebrows pulled together in focused concentration. "Here," he finally said, kneeling near the far corner where the wall met the old bookcase. "It's loose." Emily knelt beside him, brushing her fingertips across the floor. One plank was raised slightly, almost imperceptibly, but enough for Noah to notice. Grace dropped onto the floor beside them, her honey-brown eyes shining with both excitement and apprehension. Eli watched from a few feet away, standing on the edge of courage and fear. Emily used the dull blade of a utility knife she found in a drawer to wedge beneath the loose plank and pry gently. At first, it resisted, creaking softly, but with Noah's steady hands guiding the edge upward and Grace's small fingers helping lift the corner, the board finally shifted. A soft breath of cold air drifted out from the dark gap beneath, carrying the faint smell of dust and old paper. Eli's curiosity finally pushed him forward, and he tiptoed closer, clutching a blanket like a cape around his shoulders. The gap beneath the floor revealed a small wooden compartment built between the beams, clearly intentional. A hidden space that someone long ago wanted to keep away from prying eyes. Inside lay a wooden box wrapped in what looked like waxed cloth. The wood was darkened with age edges worn, and a small metal clasp held the lid shut. Emily lifted it carefully. The box was heavier than it appeared. She set it gently onto the rug before fully unwrapping it. When the lid opened, the children leaned in as if drawn by the pull of a shared heartbeat. Inside were bundles of folded maps, several notebooks bound in twine, and a metal tin coated in a thin layer of soot. Emily picked up one of the maps first. It was drawn with thin ink lines, terrain landmarks, a rough outline of Lake Superior's curve, and a series of markings that stretched from the cabin to a point farther north. Near the top, a symbol caught her attention, a circle split by a vertical line, the same symbol that had been carved into the stone in the journal she had read the night before. "What's that?" Grace whispered, touching the symbol lightly. "Some kind of signature." Emily shook her head. "I don't know yet." Noah pulled one of the notebooks free. Its cover was soft, the leather cracked and dry like old skin. On the first page was a careful script, elegant but strong. Notes on the Northern Passage, W.H. Winter, 1937. Noah read aloud quietly, and something tightened in Emily's stomach. W.H. Margaret Hale. The initials matched. She felt the weight of the box grow heavier in her lap. These were Margaret's journals, her secrets. The pages spoke of brutal winters, of repairing walls alone, of disappearing supplies, and of people in town who asked too many questions. But then the entries shifted. They grew more methodical, more scientific. Margaret wrote about a phenomenon beneath Lake Superior, a natural formation she called the Ice Channel, describing it as a shifting tunnel formed by geothermal heat that created pockets of unfrozen water beneath the lake's thick winter surface. She described dangerous expeditions taken alone through the woods, the odd warmth near certain rocks, and the gate a narrow stone entrance that led down to the channel. Grace shivered, imagining Margaret wandering alone in the night through storms like the one they had just survived. Noah flipped the page. Another entry, this time written with shaking hands, ink smudged. This must remain hidden. If the town discovers what lies beneath the ice, they will not preserve it, they will devour it. Beneath the sentence was a crude drawing, a cavern beneath the lake, its walls glimmering with crystalline ice. And at the center something Emily couldn't quite recognize, an angular structure, metallic half buried under frozen layers. A cold tremor ran through her. She had never known Margaret Hale, but through these pages she saw a woman fiercely protective, someone who had carried knowledge heavy enough to isolate her, someone who believed secrets could be dangerous if held by the wrong hands. Noah turned to another map, one more detailed, with coordinates and strange notes scrawled in the margins. Lines traced from the cabin to the edge of the lake and then to a point beneath its surface. A hand-drawn arrow pointed to that location. Beside it, in Margaret's tight handwriting, were the words, "No one in town must ever know." Grace's voice trembled. Why would she hide all this? Emily swallowed. Maybe she was protecting something. At that moment, a floorboard creaked loudly, not from beneath them, but from the far end of the hallway. All four of them froze. Noah's eyes widened. Grace grabbed Eli's hand. Emily stood slowly, her heart pounding, forcing her breath steady. "Old houses make noises," she said softly, even though she didn't entirely believe it anymore. But she wasn't ready to risk another unknown. She placed the journals and maps back into the wooden box and closed the lid. "We'll look again later," she whispered. "For now, we stick together." It wasn't until she slid the plank back into place that she noticed something she hadn't seen before. Another marking burned into the underside of the board. The same circle with a vertical line. Someone had marked this hiding spot intentionally. Someone wanted these secrets preserved exactly where they were. Emily pressed her hand over the marking, trying to steady the unease rising up her spine. The cabin wasn't just old. It wasn't abandoned. It was curated, preserved, left in a state of waiting. And now she and her children were uncovering pieces of a story that might never have been meant for them. Yet the words on the back of the photograph echoed through her mind, "For the one who comes after me." Maybe Margaret had known. Maybe she had chosen Emily. But for what purpose, Emily still didn't know. The storm had quieted by morning, leaving the world draped in a soft blanket of white that glittered with a deceptive gentleness beneath the weak sunlight. The cabin's windows were rimed with ice-thin fractal patterns spreading outward like the fingerprints of winter itself. Emily stood by the stove, warming her hands, staring at the wooden box on the table as if it were a living thing capable of changing their fate with one breath. Her mind churned through the discoveries of the previous day, the symbol carved beneath the floor, the maps, the journals, the drawings of the tunnel beneath Lake Superior. She felt both compelled and repelled by the secrets Margaret Hale had left behind, as though Margaret had placed a weight directly onto Emily's shoulders and whispered, "Carry this, even if you fear it." Noah had been awake since dawn. He sat at the table with the largest map spread before him, tracing a line from the cabin toward the lake with a pencil he found wedged behind a drawer. His brow furrowed in concentration the way it always did when he was trying to decode the world. He had a mind that leapt toward patterns and puzzles, something Emily had always admired and worried about in equal measure. The boy needed answers the way others needed warmth. Grace sat beside him, her small fingers brushing over the strange symbol on the map again and again, a circle bisected by a downward line. Her curls framed her face, which carried that rare mixture of innocence and intuition. "It looks like someone split the sun in half," she whispered. Noah didn't look up. "It's not a sun. It's a marker. A direction. Or maybe a warning." Grace shivered. "It feels like someone wanted us to find it." Meanwhile, Eli stood quietly before the large painting hanging above the mantel. The artwork depicted the frozen lake at twilight, its surface shimmering with blue and silver hues beneath a gentle moon. It was beautifully painted, almost hauntingly so. The brushstrokes captured the eerie shifting glow beneath the ice, something that felt alive. Eli pressed his small palm against the canvas as if greeting an old friend. "It's warm," he whispered. Emily blinked. "Warm!" She stepped over and placed her own hand atop the painting's wooden frame. Cold. Her heart tightened. Eli's eyes, large and dark, reflected the lake in the painting. "It's warm for me," he said gently, then leaned his cheek to the painting as if listening for a heartbeat. Emily swallowed hard. Eli often sensed things others did not, feelings, intentions, the sort of quiet that lingered in a room. She used to dismiss it as a child's imagination, but now, in this cabin, full of secrets, she wasn't so sure. Although apprehension tugged at her ribs, Emily returned to the journals. She turned to the next few pages, careful not to tear the fragile paper. These entries were different, sharper, more technical. Margaret's handwriting became cramped and urgent. The language shifted from domestic details to diagrams and measurements. She wasn't just a caretaker, Emily murmured. She was studying something. Noah looked up, studying what Emily pointed to a line on the page. Cryodynamic movement beneath the lake's sublayer. She frowned. She was researching how the ice moves beneath the surface with something about pressure zones and geothermal pockets. Noah's eyes lit with recognition, like the tunnel she drew. Emily nodded and flipped further until she reached a page where the ink was darker, almost carved into the fibers of the page from the pressure of Margaret's pen. She read aloud, If used correctly, it could save the entire town. But misused, it could destroy everything. A silence fell over the room, thick as the snow outside. Grace covered her mouth with both hands. Noah leaned forward, studying the sentence like a clue. Eli tucked himself closer to Emily's leg. Save the town, how Grace whispered. Emily turned the page. More drawings, cross-sections of ice, energy waves, pressure caverns. A crude but recognizable sketch of a metallic structure embedded beneath the lake, the same structure they'd seen in the earlier journal. Margaret wrote of natural energy, an immense renewable force locked beneath Superior's frozen shell. She believed the lake itself generated surges of kinetic energy from a specific pressure cycle. Harnessed correctly, it could provide clean power to the entire region. But if disturbed just once, it could trigger collapses in the ice shelf, flooding, or worse, destabilize the entire geological layer. She wasn't just hiding a secret, Emily said hollowly. She was protecting it. Noah leaned closer to the maps. If she hid all this, someone else might have tried to find it too. Grace's honey-colored eyes widened. You mean the town leaders? Or companies? Noah said darkly. Or anyone who wants free energy or to sell it. Emily closed the journal pulse tight. The realization pressed in on her. Margaret wasn't paranoid. She was guarding something powerful, something that could have changed Duluth forever. There was a sudden knock at the door, urgent, rapid, not like the slow, cautious tapping from last night. Emily flinched. The children froze. She approached the door with deliberate steps, gripping the handle tightly before opening it just enough to see out. A woman stood on the porch, brushing snow off her jacket. She appeared to be in her early 60s, tall and lean, her silver-streaked hair pulled back into a tight braid beneath a knit cap. Her face was angular with sharp cheekbones and deep-set brown eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Her winter coat was heavy and functional, the kind worn by someone accustomed to harsh weather. "Morning," the woman said briskly. "You must be Emily." Emily nodded warily. The woman extended a gloved hand. "Name's Linda Harrow. Sheriff out here. I check on properties after storms. And since I saw smoke from this cabin yesterday, figured I'd come make sure everything's all right." The surname made Emily's breath hitch. "Any relation to Mrs. Harrow from my old building?" she asked. Linda gave a small smile. "She's my sister. Less patient than me, but a good heart." Emily's shoulders loosened by a fraction. Linda stepped inside when invited, stomping snow off her boots. Close up, Emily noticed little details, the faint scar running from Linda's chin to her neck as if from an old injury. The steel-gray softness of her hair, the way she carried herself with the assurance of someone who spent decades dealing with both storms and stubborn people. Linda noticed the journals and maps still spread across the table. Going through Margaret's old things, she asked gently. Emily hesitated, trying to understand what she left behind. Linda nodded slowly. Margaret was brilliant. Strange, yes, but brilliant. Folks said she wasted her life studying the lake, but she knew things. Her eyes flickered toward the map in Noah's hands, narrowing slightly. Dangerous things sometimes. Emily's pulse thudded. "Did you know about her research?" Linda shrugged but didn't meet her eyes. Only what she shared. Margaret didn't trust many. Her tone carried a weight, a suggestion she was holding back more than she was telling. Before Emily could ask further, Linda zipped her coat. "Storm's coming tonight. A big one. You have enough wood, enough supplies." Emily nodded, though she wasn't sure. Linda softened. "If you need anything, radio's down by the ranger station." And Emily, she paused. Not everything Margaret hid should be uncovered. Some things were meant to stay buried. She left those words hanging heavily in the air before stepping back into the cold and disappearing into the trees. Emily shut the door slowly. Noah stared at her. "Mom," She knows something. Grace hugged herself. Everyone knows something. Except us. Eli whispered, "We shouldn't go to the lake." Emily knelt beside him, brushing his hair gently. "I won't let anything hurt you," she whispered. But deep inside, she felt the truth stirring. Staying away might no longer be an option. Margaret had left these clues for a reason, and now that they had found them, the path ahead was already shifting beneath their feet like cracking ice. The storm returned with a different voice that afternoon, no longer the frantic howl of a restless sky, but a low, continuous moan that wrapped itself around the cabin like a warning. The windows trembled under the weight of the rising wind, and flakes of snow drifted past the glass in thick curtains. Inside, the children hovered around the table as Emily traced a fingertip along the map once more, following the inked lines leading from the cabin to a spot marked with the split circle symbol. The map's edges crackled under her touch. It was fragile, but its meaning felt solid, undeniable. Something was waiting out there just beyond the cabin walls beneath the frozen layers of the land. Emily's breath fogged against the cold air seeping from under the door. Her heart beat with a rhythm she recognized as fear trying to masquerade as determination. Beside her, Noah stood tall for a 10-year-old, his narrow shoulders squared with the seriousness of someone far older. His analytical gaze darted between the map and the frosted window, calculating distance, terrain risk. Grace held the lantern they had found in a dusty cabinet, her small hands shaking slightly despite her excitement. She had a gentle smile that brightened her face even when shadows threatened to swallow it. Eli clutched the scarf wrapped around his neck, his big eyes flicking between his siblings, absorbing their emotions like a sponge. Emily inhaled deeply. "If we're doing this," she said quietly, "we stay together. No wandering, no running ahead." Noah nodded resolutely, while Grace and Eli mirrored him, though their nods carried tremors of uncertainty. They bundled into coats, layered scarves around their necks, and stepped outside into the cutting wind. The snow crunched beneath their boots, thick and powdery, muffling every sound except the distant groan of shifting ice on the lake. The cabin loomed behind them, its silhouette smudged against the swirling white. Emily carried the lantern, Noah held the flashlight, and Grace tucked the map safely under her coat. Eli walked close to Emily, holding one of her hands with a grip tighter than frostbite. Behind the cabin, the map directed them toward a mound of snow piled unusually high, a place where the ground dipped slightly as if something beneath had settled unevenly. Noah scraped away the top layer, first his gloved fingers brushing against something firmer than frozen earth. His eyes widened. "It's wood," he breathed. Emily joined him, sweeping away snow until the outline of a wooden hatch emerged, its planks warped and darkened, but unmistakably man-made. Rusted metal brackets clung to its edges like ancient joints. The surface was engraved with the circle and line symbol. A quiet dread crawled up Emily's spine. This wasn't an accidental discovery. Margaret had marked this place, hidden it, and left it for someone who came after. Together, they pulled at the handle. At first, the hatch resisted ice, binding it shut. Noah grabbed the edge with both hands, face red with effort. Emily pushed her shoulder into the wood. Grace wedged her boot against the side. Eli, too small to help with strength, pressed his tiny hands against the hatch as if offering his will instead of muscle. Something cracked, a sharp snap like a bone breaking, and the hatch jerked upward. A rush of icy air escaped from below, smelling like stone and forgotten winters. A narrow set of wooden steps descended into darkness. Emily held up the lantern. The stairway looked old, but surprisingly solid, the beams reinforced with metal brackets that had not yet rusted away. Someone, at some point, had spent time maintaining this. A faint shimmer glinted along the walls below. Emily whispered, "Stay close." They descended one step at a time. With each footfall, the temperature dropped sharply, surrounding them with a deep cold unlike anything above ground. The walls gradually transformed from stone to ice, the shift so natural It looked like the earth itself had been carved open. The ice was smooth, translucent, capturing the beam of Noah's flashlight and scattering it into 1,000 trembling reflections. It looked like stars trapped in a frozen sky. Grace gasped softly. "It's beautiful." Her voice echoed, bouncing off the glimmering surfaces. The tunnel stretched forward in a straight, narrow line. The air inside was strangely still, as if the cold itself held its breath. Emily could hear the faint sound of ice contracting somewhere deep within the walls, the subtle creaking like whispers traveling through crystalline veins. Eli reached out and touched the ice. His fingers recoiled, then returned, fascinated. "It sings," he whispered, hearing something only he could decipher. Emily didn't dismiss it. The tunnel felt alive. They walked for several minutes, time stretched strangely in the cold until the tunnel widened into a cavernous chamber. A circular room domed with ice that refracted their lights into a shimmering halo overhead. In the center of the chamber stood an object half encased in frozen layers, a metallic structure, cylindrical and intricate with pipes branching from its sides like the limbs of a strange mechanical root. It was larger than Emily expected, nearly as tall as she was. The metal had dulled, but still held an eerie sheen beneath the ice like something suspended between worlds. Noah stepped forward, first lifting his flashlight to illuminate the shape. "Mom," he whispered, awe threading through each syllable. "This is exactly like the drawing in the journal." Grace approached slowly, eyes wide, her breath forming tiny white clouds as she stared. "What is it?" she asked. Emily hesitated, searching her memories of Margaret's writings. "A device," she murmured. "Something Margaret was studying, maybe even building. But why hide it?" Noah circled the structure carefully, his brows furrowing. "Maybe because someone wanted to find it, or destroy it, or—" His voice trailed off. Grace kneeled and brushed away the frost along the floor, revealing grooves carved into the ice. They weren't random, they formed a pattern, a ring of symbols surrounding the device. Some resembled maps. Others resembled warnings. Eli pointed to one depicting a wave crashing over the outline of a small town. His whisper carried a tremor. "Mom, is that Duluth?" Emily knelt beside him, heart pounding. The symbol was crude but unmistakable. A wave, a town, a warning. She exhaled shakily. Margaret said it could destroy everything if used wrong. Noah's voice grew quieter. "Do you think she left something else down here?" Emily reached out and touched the ice coating the device. It was colder than anything she had ever felt. Colder than the air, colder than the lake's surface on a moonless night. The cold clung to her fingertips as if the metal were absorbing her warmth. For a moment she thought she felt a faint vibration, something deep inside the machine responding, awakening, recognizing. She pulled her hand back sharply. Eli tugged on her coat. "Mom, someone used to watch this." She blinked at him. "What do you mean?" He pointed toward the edge of the chamber. A wooden stool sat there, half rotten, but clearly placed intentionally. Beside it lay a lantern long extinguished and a notebook sealed inside a clear, weatherproof pouch. Emily hurried over, lifting the notebook. It was younger than the others, its leather less worn. On the front was a date scratched with a shaky hand, 1997. Margaret's handwriting. Emily clutched the journal tightly, feeling the weight of everything collapsing into a single truth. Margaret hadn't simply studied the lake. She had guarded this place, visited it, taken notes here, hidden it. Emily turned toward her children, breath trembling. "We shouldn't be here long," she whispered. But she also knew they couldn't turn away now. Not after seeing this. Not after realizing Margaret had built something worth protecting, something that had the potential to save or destroy their town. The shadows of the chamber seemed to deepen as if listening. Somewhere in the distance, a deep rumble traveled through the frozen walls. Not an earthquake, not structural settling. Something else. Something alive beneath the ice. Emily held her children close. "We'll come back," she said softly, pressing a kiss to Eli's forehead. "But for now, we need to think." They began the long walk back up the tunnel. Behind them, the chamber remained still, the device gleaming beneath layers of crystalline frost waiting. It had waited for Margaret, and now, as if sensing new guardians, it waited for them. The snow had settled into a deceptive calm by the time Emily and her children climbed back into the cabin, but the stillness in the air only sharpened the tension buzzing beneath her skin. The lantern's glow flickered along the wooden walls, catching on the box of journals now resting on the table like a sleeping beast made of paper and secrets. The children huddled near the fire, wrapped in blankets, their cheeks still flushed from the cold of the ice chamber. Yet their eyes, wide, restless, uncertain, revealed that none of them had truly warmed up. Emily's hands trembled as she opened the newest journal they had recovered, the one dated 1997. The cover cracked slightly at the spine, as though reluctant to reveal what lay within. Margaret's handwriting filled the first page, hurried but still deliberate, each stroke of ink laden with urgency. The lake speaks through movement. Beneath its quiet face lies the pulse of something ancient and powerful, something we were never meant to own. Only respect. Emily swallowed hard and continued reading. The entries shifted quickly from scientific descriptions to warnings. Margaret wrote of cycles the lake followed, peaks of pressure, sudden collapses, shifting internal ice formations. She claimed the lake generated pockets of kinetic energy in a predictable rhythm, something she had observed since her youth. She had built a prototype, the machine to measure and potentially harness the energy with minimal disruption. But soon after, she realized others wanted it too. They noticed the readings. They questioned my expeditions. The town council sent men to check in. But they weren't checking, they were hunting. I saw their greed before they saw my fear. Emily felt the weight of those words. She imagined Margaret solitary, brilliant, stubborn, trying to protect something bigger than herself. Noah pointed to a diagram. "Mom, look, it shows how the device works." Emily leaned over, studying the detailed sketch. The device was built like a closed circuit meant to convert the pressure shifts into usable energy. Pipes channeled the movement, and internal components, gears, coils, and something like a resonator captured the kinetic force. But beside the sketch, Margaret had scrawled, "Never activate without stabilizing the chamber." If the lake is restless, the machine becomes a threat. Grace traced another line of text. She said something about people coming after her. Indeed, Margaret noted the arrival of corporate representatives, men who promised research funding and technological advancement but whose intentions were rooted in profit. When she refused them, they had pressured local leaders to intervene. Margaret had gone silent after that, keeping her findings hidden, her work buried beneath the ice. Emily closed the journal, heart thundering. She was protecting the town, she whispered. Protecting all of us. Noah stood shoulders tight with determination. "Mom, if she hid it for this long, what happens now that we found it?" Emily didn't answer. Not yet. She didn't have one. The storm picked up outside, rattling the windows. Eli pressed closer to her, his small fingers gripping her sleeve. "The machine was sad," he murmured softly, and Emily's breath hitched. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" He shrugged, eyes lowering. It felt lonely, like it was waiting for someone. Before Emily could respond, the lantern flickered violently, but the fire was steady. A low hum rose beneath the floorboards, so faint she thought she imagined it. Then another tremor. A pulse, rhythmic, like a heartbeat deep within the earth. Noah's head snapped up. "The machine!" Grace gasped. "Mom, did we wake it up?" Emily grabbed the lantern and the journal, motioning for them to stay close. "We're going back down," she said. "Right now." They hurried outside, snow blasting against their coats, and opened the hatch once more. The cold rushed up at them, biting and sharp, but the hum grew louder the deeper they descended. Light flickered along the tunnel walls, light that wasn't theirs. The ice glowed, faintly, illumination rippling through it like phosphorescence. Emily felt the vibrations under her boots. The air thrummed with a force that hadn't been there hours earlier. Eli clung to her leg, whispering, "It's awake." At the chamber, the sight stopped them cold. The device, previously encased in thick layers of frost, was now shedding its icy shell. Cracks splintered outward from its base, webbing through the ice like lightning frozen in motion. Soft, blue-white light pulsed from within the metal coils, growing brighter with each pulse. Noah's voice came out shaky, but awed. "Mom, it's powering on." Emily approached slowly. The warmth emanating from the metal was faint but undeniable. The machine was ancient, yet the hum of its internal components felt alive. Grace knelt near the edge, mesmerized by the lights dancing across the icy floor. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Emily reached out instinctively, wanting to touch the metal surface to confirm she wasn't dreaming. The moment her fingertips brushed the cold metal, the last layer of frost shattered outward like glass. Light erupted from the core, washing the chamber in a brilliant glow. The tunnel behind them brightened too, the ice absorbing and scattering the glow in millions of refracted beams. It looked like a galaxy igniting beneath the earth. Eli covered his eyes but giggled with delight. Grace stared up at the domed ceiling, the reflected light turning her curls into threads of gold. Noah, stunned, whispered, "It's generating energy right now." Emily staggered back, overwhelmed. The device wasn't alive, but it felt sentient, responsive, as if Margaret had designed it to wait for someone who understood caution rather than exploitation, someone who approached with humility rather than greed. "Why did it react to you?" Noah asked, eyes fixed on his mother. Emily thought of Margaret's message, "For the one who comes after me." She whispered, "Maybe because she trusted her bloodline." But just as the glow reached its brightest, a sharp, distant rumbling shook the chamber. Cracks raced along the ice walls, not dangerous yet, but growing. The lake was responding. Pressure was shifting. Energy was awakening. Emily grabbed her children. "We have to go. Now." They rushed up the tunnel, the light chasing them until they reached the hatch and slammed it shut behind them. Snow fell heavily, as though trying to bury the tremors below. Back inside the cabin, Emily collapsed onto a chair, her breath uneven. The children gathered around her, silent, afraid to speak. The journals lay open on the table, the words blurring in her vision. She whispered into the stillness, "Margaret, what did you leave us?" And in the distance, beneath the frozen lake, the machine hummed like a sleeping giant, stirring toward the brink of awakening. The storm that night did not roar, it whispered. A low, endless murmur that crawled along the cabin walls like a question repeated over and over, waiting for an answer. Emily sat at the wooden table long after her children had fallen asleep near the fire, each bundled in blankets like small cocoons of warmth against the encroaching cold. The journals lay open before her. The maps, worn thin by age, stretched across the tabletop like the fragile skin of secrets too large for one life to contain. And beneath the floor, barely perceptible but impossible to ignore, the faint hum of the awakened machine throbbed like a distant heartbeat. Emily pressed her palms to her eyes, forcing back the exhaustion threatening to collapse her. She had spent most of her adult life battling circumstances rather than deciding her future. For years, choices weren't choices, they were last resorts. Keep the job or lose the kids' dinner. Pay rent or pay utilities. Stay silent or risk being thrown out of another shelter. Life never offered invitations, only ultimatums. But now, unbelievably, she held a choice so large it terrified her. Noah stirred from where he slept by the fire. His small face turned toward her, illuminated faintly by the lantern's glow. He blinked groggily. "Mom, why aren't you sleeping?" She forced a soft smile. "Just thinking, sweetheart." He sat up, rubbing his eyes. About the machine, Emily hesitated, then nodded. Noah crawled into the chair beside her, folding his long legs awkwardly, looking older than 10 and yet heartbreakingly young. If we tell the town, he said carefully, they'll want to use it. Yes. And companies. Big ones. Yes. And they might take the cabin. Or take us away. Or make us leave. Emily swallowed hard. She had thought the same. Fear was an old friend sitting always just over her shoulder. Grace woke next, her curls wild and cheeks pink with warmth. She padded quietly to the table, climbed onto Emily's lap, and rested her head on her chest. The machine felt sad, she whispered, like it didn't want to be hurt. Emily wrapped her arms around her daughter. Machines don't feel things, honey. Grace shook her head, eyes half closed. This one does. Emily didn't argue, not after everything they had seen. Eli wandered over last, clutching his blanket like a tiny cloak, eyes sleepy but alert. He pressed his cheek against Emily's arm. If we tell people, he murmured softly, they'll fight. A chill washed through her, not from cold, but from the simple truth in her youngest son's words. Eli was only 4, but he had an uncanny way of sensing things beneath the surface emotions in their rawest form. Emily stared at the journals again. Margaret's warnings were unmistakable. Used well, it saves. Used wrongly, it destroys. The town's history suddenly struck her with new clarity. Mining companies had tried to exploit the land around Superior for decades, always leaving scars. Factories that promised jobs then abandoned the area, leaving unemployment and pollution behind. Duluth was a city people used when it suited them and forgot when it didn't. Emily had lived the consequences of those broken promises. Another knock came at the door. Soft, this time hesitant. Emily tensed. Noah stood and grabbed the flashlight, instinctively holding it like a weapon. Grace clung to Emily's sleeve. Eli hid behind her leg. Emily opened the door carefully. Wesley Grant stood on the porch, cap pulled low, snow dusting his shoulders. His face, strong jawline, days-old stubble, pale green eyes held a troubled calm. The lantern hanging from his hand cast a warm halo around him. He was dressed the same as before, heavy coat boots crusted with frozen slush, but there was a tension to him now that hadn't been there the night they first met. "Evening," he said quietly. "Saw lights under the snowbank behind your cabin. Thought you should know." Emily stiffened. "You saw the tunnel light?" Wesley nodded slowly. Didn't know what it was. "But I know it wasn't natural." His gaze flicked past her, scanning the cabin interior with caution. "Emily, did you find something down there?" Her breath caught. She didn't want to lie, not to the man who had shown nothing but quiet respect. But the truth was too big, too dangerous. She hesitated too long. Wesley noticed. His brows drew together. "You need to be careful," he said, stepping closer. His voice dropped. "Linda, the sheriff, mentioned the Hale property earlier. She was worried someone might stir up things better left alone." Emily's heart stumbled. "Linda came by earlier." "I know," he replied. "She stopped at my place later. Said you found old notes. Old research." His face tightened. "Emily, people have been trying to get their hands on whatever Margaret was working on since before I was born. My father used to talk about it. Town politics corporations sniffing around people disappearing when they got too curious." Emily's pulse spiked. "Disappearing?" Wesley exhaled. 2 men, years ago, both asking questions about the lake. Both went out during a storm. Never came back. Emily's mind reeled. Margaret wasn't hiding from nothing, she was hiding from hunters. For a moment she considered telling Wesley everything. About the machine, the light, the possibility of clean energy that could change the entire region. But another image flashed in her mind, companies descending like vultures, the cabin seized by the state, her children labeled trespassers, or worse, pawns. She closed the door halfway, putting a physical barrier between them. "I appreciate the warning," she said softly, "but this is our problem. We'll handle it." Wesley studied her quietly, pain flickering through his eyes. Not anger hurt, disappointment. "If you need help," he murmured, "I'm here." Then he stepped back into the snow and vanished into the night. Grace tugged Emily's sleeve. "You didn't tell him." Emily stared at the closing door, guilt twisting in her chest. "Some secrets," she whispered, "aren't meant for everyone." Morning crept into the cabin like a hesitant promise. Soft light filtered through the frosted windows, illuminating the journals, the children, the faded photograph of the man Margaret once knew. Emily sat once more at the table, staring at the blueprint of the machine. She imagined what it could do: clean energy for the town, warmth for the poorest, jobs for those forgotten, hope for a place starved of opportunity. But then she imagined greed. Corporations tearing apart the lake, politicians selling promises, families displaced, the machine weaponized. No. Margaret had trusted her for a reason. She had passed this legacy not to town leaders or corporations, but to a struggling mother, someone with nothing left to lose but her children. Emily placed her hand firmly on the journal. "We protect it," she said aloud, waking the children. Noah blinked. "Even if it means staying quiet." "Yes," Grace whispered, "even if the town stays cold and sad." For now, Emily answered, voice steady. "Because power isn't safe in everyone's hands. We wait. We learn. And when the right person comes along, the one who won't use it to hurt others will know." Eli touched her arm. "Margaret picked you, Mommy." Emily hugged him tightly. Maybe she did. That evening, as snow drifted softly around the cabin, mother and children sat together near the fire. Through the frosted window, the world outside glowed with pale blue light reflecting off the frozen lake. But inside, warm orange firelight wrapped around them like a blessing. Emily looked at her children. Their tired faces, their small bodies curled safely against one another, and felt something she hadn't felt in years: belonging. She whispered, "We're home." And somewhere beneath the lake, the machine slept again, waiting for the day the world would be ready. In the end, Emily's journey reminds us that miracles don't always arrive with thunder or bright lights. Sometimes they come quietly through an old cabin, a forgotten journal, or a moment of courage when hope feels impossible. And perhaps that is how God works most often, not by removing our struggles, but by guiding us toward the strength we didn't know we had, the purpose we didn't expect to find. Just like Emily, many of us walk through seasons of cold and uncertainty, wondering if anyone sees us. But God sees every step. He places small signs along our path, people, opportunities, unexpected blessings. So when the time comes, we realize we were never walking alone. What Emily inherited wasn't just a cabin or a secret. She inherited a calling. And sometimes in the quiet corners of our own lives, God is preparing a calling for us too. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share it, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these stories reach someone else who might need a reminder of hope today. May God bless you and your loved ones, guide your steps, and keep you warm through every winter of life. Amen.